Hello, good people of the internet. This time I'm gonna talk about one of the more underrated builds in D2.
The Ice Bowazon.
I've mostly covered budget stuff on my channel so far, but this time the build I'm gonna lay out for you is actually going to be rather expensive. I do think the character is still perfectly playable with budget gear too, so if you can't quite assemble the gear I have laid out for you in this video, don't let it stop you from trying this out. You can take my gear setup as something to aim towards, if anything. And this is one of those builds that I always keep returning to whenever I'm looking to just have some fun with the game. I think it has something to do with the sounds that the freezing arrow makes. It's like music to me, I fucking love it. Now first things first, this character plays nothing like the traditional physical damage Bowazon. It actually plays much more like a spellcaster than anything. It also is very mana hungry, so be prepared to chuck some mana potions while you are playing it. We're gonna start off with the really important items and then we're gonna move towards the filler stuff. First off, we have Razor Tail. Given how freezing arrow works, 100% pierce is actually really important for this character. I think Razor Tail on a Bowazon is a little overrated, but here it actually is so good that I just wouldn't even try to build this character without it. Then we have Raven Frost, not only for the cannot be frozen, but also for the extra dex, mana, attack rating, and the added cold damage is actually really nice as well. This ring is the perfect fit as it is for so many characters. I also consider Call to Arms and Spirit to be somewhat mandatory on swap. Most of the endgame characters use these two on swap and this build is no different in that regard. The CTA I will actually swap out sometimes after buffing, but we'll get to that later. Now Ice is of course going to be the best in slot weapon for this character. It is very expensive and it can actually be really annoying to look for that base with +3 bow skills on single player. The big question is, should you make this in a matriarchal or grand matron bow? Both of them have their ups and downs. The GMB will attack slower and will have lower DPS as a result, but it will leech better and you will have easier time with your mana with that one. I tried both of the bases and I think ultimately I prefer the faster attack speed of matriarchal bow just a little bit more. Other bows can work well too. Faith in a +3 bow skill space is really nice. Wind Force offers great physical damage and thus you can actually leech very well with that one. An upped Vision Draw or Melody Bow can be really decent budget options. Next up we have Enigma. If your goal is to do fast and efficient runs on this character, you pretty much want the Enigma. Teleport will not only help you move through the areas faster, but you will also use it to make sure your merc is on the right spot to apply conviction aura on the enemies. The downside of Enigma is that you suddenly have to worry about FCR breakpoints as well, and you will also need to cover for your resistances with the rest of your gear. For the gloves, you want to get some bow skill gloves with 20 attack speed. I unfortunately don't have very good rare bow gloves, so I use these ones with some lightning rares and magic find. You can buy 320 blue gloves from vendors and those can actually serve you really well too. For the boots, some rares will be your best bet. Stats to look out for the boots are resistances, movement speed and mana. These boots once again aren't maybe the best example, but they are the best ones that I have for this specific build. For a second ring I went with a 10 FCR ring with some mana leech. You basically really want the mana leech on the ring. Secondary stats you'd want would again be mostly mana and resistances. For the amulet slot, the standard choice I suppose is either Cat's Eye or High Lords for the attack speed. I'm using this really nice caster amulet to hit a faster teleport breakpoint. The FCR roll on the amulet doesn't actually matter for this build, even 5 would be good enough. If you get a +15 or more FCR on the amulet though, you could actually skip the FCR on the ring and that could potentially open up new options for you. The amulet and the FCR ring will put us over the 14 FCR breakpoint on our main weapon set, 48 FCR when we are on switch, and we can even get to the 99 FCR breakpoint if we swap out our CTA for Wizard Spike for teleporting. The swapping can get a little inconvenient, but it does feel nice to teleport with those fast frames. It's also worthy of noting that the Magezon has horrendous block frames when she is using any one-handed swinging weapon, and those happen to be the only types of one-handed weapons that call to arms can be made into. This means that when you are teleporting with CTA and you accidentally land in the middle of a big monster group, you can easily get block locked and you have to save and exit. Swapping CTA to Wizard Spike for teleporting somewhat circumvents this, so that's also another reason why I like doing it. Final piece of gear I wanted to talk about is the helmet, and I'm using Andariel's. Since I don't have IAS from the amulet, I wanted to get that from the helmet. Another good helmet option would be either Shaco or Nightwings, but with those you either have to settle for a slower attack speed breakpoint or a slower teleport speed. Andariel's kinda allows me to get the best of both worlds essentially. I have a plus 15 IAS plus 27 fire rest jewel in the Andes. A lot of people like making a helm like this for their Mercenary, so if you happen to have one you can actually put it to good use on this character as well. If you are only concerned about running Ancient Tunnels, you can also use some other IAS jewel on it, since in the Ancient Tunnels you won't really need the fire resistance. For the inventory, I run a full row of bow and crossbow skillers with 1 Geats Grand Charm. It can be pretty difficult to muster that full inventory of skillers on single player, so you might be happy to know that such an inventory isn't exactly mandatory. Every skiller represents roughly 3% damage increase to your freezing arrow damage. All things considered, 3% isn't actually that much, so you can still be perfectly fine using some other Grand Charms as filler while you are working towards that full skiller inventory. I play single player plugy, so I have my Torch and Annie in here. For the small charms, I like some charms with mana on them. Best secondary mods on the small charms in my opinion will be life, faster run walk and some added cold damage perhaps. I have a bunch of magic find and mana small charms in here, because I like having at least some MF on most of the characters I play. I also have one FHR all rest charm, which puts me over the 13 FHR breakpoint together with my boots. I don't think getting the greatest FHR breakpoints is necessary on this character, but 13 was really easy to get without sacrificing much for it, so I decided what the hell. I've been absolutely fine playing this character even with 0 FHR, so I'll leave the choice of which breakpoint to aim for up to you. Enough strength points to wear your equipment. I have a lot of strength from my charms and stuff, so I actually don't need to spend any points into it. With 0 points invested, I'm at 57 strength, which allows me to equip my Enigma that I made into a Mage Blade. Equipping Enigma will boost my strength high enough so that I can wear my Andy helm, and the 30 strength I get from the helm will get my strength high enough to wear my Spirit Monarch on switch. Enough dex points to wear the Matriarchal Bow, so 185 for me. Many Bowazon builds like to boost their dex as high as possible for extra damage, but our damage will mostly be elemental, so we don't want the extra dexterity. For vitality, basically pick a life total that you are comfortable with. I like to put enough points into it to get about 1000 life unbuffed, because that's a nice round number, I guess. Everything else I will spend into energy to get my mana as high as possible. Spending points into energy is usually somewhat of a taboo on most D2 builds, but here I think it is absolutely worth it. I've tried the 0 energy approach with this character as well, and with that kind of setup you basically have to mana pot after every monster group. It gets very annoying. So get your energy as high as possible. For the skills, I like to start by dipping 1 point into Critical Strike, Penetrate and then Pierce. Rank 9 Pierce with Razor Tail will be enough to get to 100% Pierce. I get that just fine with 1 hard point into it thanks to all the plus skills I have. I spent 3 hard points to get Decoy. Decoy is really useful for bail running, but if your only aim is to do Ancient Tunnels you might not even need it. Next up, I max Freezing Arrow, which is gonna be our main damage skill. Then I max Cold Arrow as a synergy. No points into Ice Arrow at all, because that only increases the freeze duration of Freezing Arrow, and that is already long enough. Next up, you have to decide what you want to do with cold immunes. A lot of people pick up Strafe, but the problem with Strafe is that the physical damage of the Matriarchal Bow is terrible, so Strafe or any other weapon-based skill will just end up looking really embarrassing. If you use some other bow, you can consider it. What I rather do with this character though is I like to max out Exploding Arrow and its synergy, which is the Fire Arrow. After these things are covered, I start spending points into Penetrate to get my attack rating up. Ice has the Ignore Target's Defense mod on it, and you will get the initial explosion from Freezing Arrow even if your attack roll wasn't actually successful. However, Ignore Target's Defense mod won't work on any of the champions or boss monsters, and you will need a successful attack roll to do a piercing chain with your Freezing Arrow. So once you have other stuff covered, I recommend you start dumping points into Penetrate. Now, I personally don't like going for Valkyrie on this character. In order to get to Valkyrie, you need to spend points in those evade talents, and in my opinion, those talents can be more of a pain than anything. I actually almost forgot to talk about the Mercenary. When I'm running the tunnels, I use a pretty basic Infinity setup with Cryptic Axe, Fortitude, and an IAS jeweled Anti-Helm. This is generally fine for ancient tunnels, but if I'm planning on doing any other areas, and especially if I plan on doing any boss killing, I actually use a little bit different Mercenary setup. I'll show off the other gear setup for the Mercenary towards the end of the video. Quick lecture on how Freezing Arrow interacts with Pierce. For making things simple, let's say our Freezing Arrow is dealing flat 4k cold damage, which is kinda in line with the average damage you could expect to achieve with late game equipment. Let's say we shoot our arrow at this group of zombies here. If we are not piercing, our arrow will explode when it hits the first zombie and deal 4k damage to each of them. So decent, but nothing spectacular. Now, if our attack successfully pierces the zombie, the arrow will continue traveling forward. It hits the zombie behind it, causing another explosion, dealing another 4k damage to each of them. So we're getting up there. If we successfully pierce again, we of course get one final explosion when we hit the last zombie, bringing our damage total to a whopping 36k. Now keep in mind that we are only talking 3 enemies here. We could also have enemies on the sides. With our attack speed, we are doing this every 8 frames. That translates to 3.12 attacks per second. We are also not considering the enemy cold resistance at all, which we are lowering considerably between the Ice Bow and the Conviction Aura. I'm not a big math guy, but that's a lot of damage.
That's a lot of damage!
Running just ancient tunnels is cool and all, and that's an area where this character really excels at, given the lack of cold immunes there. But to demonstrate the actual strength of this character, I figured I would end things by showing off some good old-fashioned bale running. And yes, this character is a really decent bale runner, believe it or not. I like to clear the throne room on players 1, and then I go players 8 for the waves for more experience. On this one I happen to get every possible cold immune spawn in the throne room, so clearing it takes some extra time. For these ones I will leave my wizard spike in the stash, and instead I'll carry with me a lower res wand. The lower res speeds up the player's 8 waves, and especially the bale kill a whole hell of a lot. I don't bother with the lower res for the first wave, they basically die too fast for it to matter. Wave 2 is the most painful one since the skeletons in it are cold immune. Sometimes you get good RNG and they stick together, so you can basically finish them off really fast with the exploding arrow. But sometimes they scatter all around the throne room and you're gonna end up being really miserable hunting them down. Wave 3 is really easy. Sometimes they don't even cast their Hydras if you manage to freeze them at the right time. The decoy is not only used as a meat shield on these runs. I use it to make sure Bale casts Decrepify on it instead of me. Wave 4 is basically more of the same. You pre-span some arrows and once they spawn you cast lower res on them and finish them off. Lister on wave 5 sometimes spawns with unbreakable cold immunity. If that happens you can kite him out of the throne room instead of killing him. For Bale, I just go down to players 1. You can kill him on higher players settings with this character, but it will be slow and you will most likely burn through a whole bunch of mana potions, especially if you get bad RNG with his mana burn. And there you have it. I'm gonna finish things off by showing the merc setup I use for these runs. This time I don't have life leads from the helmet, so I'm getting it from Chains of Honor. I'm using Cham G-Phase for Cannot Be Frozen and extra Crushing Blow to help with the Bale kill a little bit. I'm also using a little bit faster Infinity. Thanks for watching the video. You can leave a comment if you want me to cover some other builds in the future. Or you can let me know if you happen to completely disagree with the choices I've made. If you found this guide helpful, you can give it a thumbs up.